The idea of rock bottom means a lot of different things to different types of alcoholics and addicts. It could be something that's life threatening, or it could be losing something very important, or just having nothing left. I tend to think about it less in sort of consequences and more as a state of being or a way of mind. The example I always use is that let's say that my tail light goes out, so I get pulled over and I was drinking and driving. And now this is going to be another DUI for me. And so I'm going to go to jail and for a longer amount of time. And because I'm in jail for that amount of time, I lose my job. And then I can't afford my apartment. I'm getting booted out of that. And this was the last straw for my girlfriend. So now I've lost all this stuff. And really, though, was my rock bottom not replacing my tail lights? No, what happened was that not having the tail light and getting pulled over just revealed what my life already was. I was already in rock bottom. My life was totally chaotic and on the brink of disaster, and I had no idea what I was doing. And just on a razor's thin edge of thin ice just the whole time. And I was either oblivious to it or denying it. And you get to a point where, and this is what I really think of rock bottom as, is it's to a point where you're just like, I can't do this anymore. And maybe you still want to drink and use drugs, but you're like, I can't do this anymore. Like either because of all these external things now and all this crap I've brought down on myself that I can't, or I just don't want to, like just spiritually almost, or psychologically and emotionally, you're just like, I can't go on like this. Like maybe I don't know what to do, but I can't do this, right? So I think there's ways that you can have rock bottoms in sobriety where you feel like I can't do this anymore. Except in that version, not being able to do it anymore means I want to return to drugs and alcohol. Usually as this rock bottom in sobriety is a precursor to relapse. And so here's the thing. I think this occurs with a lot of people where, there's the idea that you can be sober but not in recovery. And a lot of times you become very miserable from doing that. And there's just a lot of dissatisfaction in your life. And, sometimes I think you can be doing, no one works like a perfect program or anything like that. But, sometimes you could be doing your best, or at least what you think is your best. And you get in these terrible places because as a precursor relapse, like what I'm talking about is not that you're very, very new to recovery. So you're very fragile, and then you have maybe just a bad day, and then you have a huge craving, and then you just make a split decision that's poor or impulsive, and then you're right back in the cycle. I'm not talking about that. I'm not talking about being in sobriety and then having something really bad happen to you, or like multiple bad things happen at once. Again, I'm talking about this idea of a state of mind that you could get to, where in a lot of meetings, look, I understand the sentiment and the meaning behind it, but in a lot of meetings, you'll hear people say that, my worst day sober is still better than my best day drunk or best day high. And again, I get the meaning behind that. I understand where it's coming from, but at least for me, that is not true. Okay. I have had some pretty terrible days sober, and more so early on. I've had some great days drinking and using, some great times, and this is not to glorify it by any means, but I'm also not going to lie to myself about it. I think I need to respect the disease and respect what it did for me as a way that it trapped me in there. And then to be real with myself of knowing that was very long ago. The recent years of this have been pretty bad. But I can still romanticize and think back to it, but that's not the truth. However, again, it's more important is not understanding what drugs and alcohol did for you, but the idea of that your worst day sober can be pretty bad. But again, I'm not just talking about a day. I'm talking about a process where, again, if you have co-occurring disorders, this could be about depression or bipolar or dealing with anxiety or, post-traumatic stress. And maybe you're doing the recovering thing, but you're not attending to that in a very specific way that it needs to be. And maybe, and I've talked about post-acute withdrawal symptoms before, where maybe you hit a huge wave of anhedonia, which is not just about like not having interest in things. It's not having interest in things that you love, that you have been interested in, and interested in sober too. And it's just gone. You're just feeling totally empty, and I can remember being stuck in these places where I got to that sort of rock bottom point or that rock bottom mentality where I'm just like, I can't do this anymore. Like I can't because here's the thing. I think about it in that, again, rock bottom as a state of mind. Because in my life, because I'm sober, there aren't consequences. I mean, it's not, not everything's peachy king or whatever, but like the bad stuff isn't happening to me. I'm not like, humiliating myself or getting in trouble with the law or getting fired from work or all the other things that came with it. None of that's happening. Yet I've gotten to this place where I'm like, man, I don't want to do this anymore. I don't think I even can. Like, it's and maybe you've been in recovery for a while and you come to that place and you're just like, oh no, I get it when I was early on that I could be like, I never thought I could go a day without drinking and using. And then you go through it and you believe it's possible, but then that wave comes back and hits you and you're like, oh no, I feel like I'm back on day 2. And do I ever escape this? And of course you do. And of course it's temporary, because here's the thing. And here's the one way, I wanted to illustrate this idea of rock bottoms and sobriety compared to the rock bottoms in drinking and using, is that these stages will pass. Now, the shitstorm and rock bottoms in drinking and using, they won't pass. They just keep getting worse and worse, and until it actually takes you all the way down, 6 feet down, they don't pass. It will only get worse. Maybe you'll avoid some of the consequences, or maybe you'll recuperate from some of the consequences, but if you go right back into it, it's just going to keep happening. Now, some may argue that, you know what though, if you are just staying sober and you're not really doing anything for recovery, then maybe actually that won't pass. Maybe you'll be stuck in this state of just total, again, miserable dissatisfaction, boredom, because believe me, boredom is a type of suffering, and you're just caught in this way where you find yourself sleepwalking through life, or you feel empty, you don't really care, and, you're maybe disappointed. You're like, I thought this was supposed to, radically change my life, and I just feel like, blech. But I think, I was going to say I promise, I can't promise anything, but I think, though, that if you try to find a way, if you try to remedy it, and again, you don't need to come up with the masterful plan, but if you just try, and here's the key thing, take advice. There are so many times I have asked for advice when I didn't realize that I was not going to take it. I don't know. I was just getting a second opinion or something. I was not really going to take it. But that is the one thing, is that I highlight that if you've ever been in this stage of being clean and sober and it's just you're fucking miserable, if you really do give it effort and you follow some advice, you maybe step outside yourself, there is a way you can get out of it. However, if you're drinking and using, for the most part, that stage of rock bottom is just going to keep being there until it just crashes, or until you get to that horrible place where you can't live with it and can't live without it, and then something has to happen, like the immovable object, which is your addiction, and the unstoppable force with just life and consequences just totally crashing into each other. Something is bound to happen. And I hope that if you get to that place where you're just like, this is so awful, and you're sober, that you can find a way out of it. Or if it is just cases of a post-acute withdrawal symptoms, if the difference of this phase lasting days or weeks or months, if it's months, then there's got to be, some action of finding a way out. That was the way I kept myself in these horrible places, was I just treaded water. The thing is that I didn't realize that just because I wasn't maybe sinking, that it didn't mean my head wasn't still underwater. To use a weird analogy. But anyways, hope you are doing well. Hope you enjoy the shorts I put out. Wait, what? That was right, shorts. I said shorts as a YouTube short. I was thinking of shorts. I said something wrong. Oh my God. Anyways, check out the podcast Shoeless in South Dakota, which now does have a YouTube channel. Type in Shoeless in South Dakota on YouTube, this sweet app you may be aware of. And it's a podcast I do with my friend. We do all sorts of topics, and now we have clips on there. So if you just want to check out and see what it is, see what you like, maybe on a subject we can talk about, who knows? It's just a couple of somewhat smart, somewhat dumb Midwestern dirtbags talking about life. So anyways, be well.